Well, South Africa has managed to maintain its credit rating positive for the first half of the year. The past few weeks, of course, we've been exposed to violent student protests, the finance minister receiving a summons. So how is the South African economy doing in the heat of this? In studio with me is Ludovic Subran from Euler Hermes, which is a big company that has more than 900 billion rands worth of insurance of business-to-business transactions. Been in South Africa for a year and a half. So you, on the one hand, know the country, but on the other hand, you give an outside perspective, Ludovic.
Exactly.
So are we heading for a downgrade, given the things I've mentioned?
I would say no. I would say no, and I don't say that because I'm in South Africa. I would say the same outside of these borders. I do think that South Africa has felt the pain. I think the country, especially the consumer, but also the companies have been particularly hit by the commodities price super slump, by China, by the tightening of the Fed, by all of these aspects that have actually hit directly South Africa through the rand. And yes, South Africa is vulnerable to external shocks because of its twin deficits, you know, the fiscal and current account deficit. But to a certain extent, I think South Africa has shown resilience, and I think South Africa has bottomed out. So it would be a very untimely move to actually downgrade South Africa now.
Where do you see the resilience?
I see the resilience in trade. I think, for example, the adjustment of the rand has been both a good and a bad news. It's true that it has hurt purchasing power, but it certainly has pushed a lot of households and companies to tighten the belt slightly, to reduce their exposure to the imported sensitivity of the dollar-denominated, goods and services. Where I see the problem, though, is indeed that when you open the news outside of South Africa and you don't dwell into the real economy, you're exposed to a lot of political noise on the line, and this is not helping the reputation. And I think it is all about the reputation today for emerging markets. You see how it costs Brazil, Russia, China a lot of trust from foreign investors, and at a time where the private investment function is really at the core of the South African recovery. Will households decide to invest more? Will bank and financial services decide to invest more? Will companies decide to invest more? It's important to maintain a type of a clean signal message. And so far, it has been resilient.
Of course, it's ironic. We have one of the best financial services sectors, the Reserve Bank, the JSE, all rated very highly, top 2 or 3 in the world. And then we have this finance minister being summoned. Now, all countries have political scandals. Sure. Figures in governments are charged, perhaps have to resign. How are you assessing the way this has been done?
Well, for me, what is interesting is that, unfortunately, South Africa is not the only one. On that matter, the way you would compare South Africa to Brazil or to Australia when it comes to commodities and the hyper-dependence on commodities, you would compare South Africa to the mess we have in Europe today in terms of political spectrum and social tensions, because the social compact has been disappointing. So I think to some extent, advanced economies, and in that way, South Africa is very advanced, I think are quite resilient to the type of mess that, companies are much more resilient than the public sector.
That's true, and they adapt, don't they? They do.
That's their job.
They're not stupid. They do. They plan. They work for various alternatives. Yeah,
they have to.
And as you say, that's where the hope lies. But to charge the finance minister and the appearance of a government that is at war with itself, as the deputy president himself has said,
I think it will be particularly important as the midterm budget will be announced next week. I think when you have such a division within the government, but also you have this type of stray dogs in that you sometimes have to maintain, because it's very important for foreign investors, for example, that there is a credible and strong signature from the foreign minister, for the Ministry of Finance. It is particularly important to know if there will be forward visibility for companies and households alike to spur trust and confidence and investment. And so I think the problem is that this arrives at a time, including the debate on the tuition fees for university students. It arrived at a time where South Africa has to redesign its DNA, its social model, its business environment and climate, and it seems that there is no such thing as contingency planning. It seems that it's a little bit done, one day yes, one day no, and this is not the way you attract foreign direct investment. This is not the way you incentivize people to invest, and this is certainly not the way you keep business growing and considering South Africa as the anchor to the wider African continent. And so I do think this is really something that needs to be toned down to the benefits, to the long-term benefits of South Africa.
If the finance minister is dismissed, removed, which the president can do at any time if he wants to, as a result of this process. What do you see the consequences?
Well, you know, the rand is certainly the biggest concern for me today. We had the similar situation at the beginning of the year with another finance minister. It was a different situation, but it was still something that was quite important for the market. So my biggest concern today is the rand, which has been already taken a toll. But I do think that South Africa can get out of that. It will really depend on the credibility of public policy making.
That is Ludovic Subran from Euler Hermes Group, where he is the chief economist.